The Red Web, Chapter 8. Suspicion. Lau hated the therapy servitor. He knew it was just following a set program. He understood that it was a dead creature whose mind served as nothing more than a glorified calculator. Knowing these things intellectually didn't make his fury any lighter. It was an irrational, deep hatred. It masked the intense pain and self-doubt that came from struggling with rehabilitation. His legs were both lost. The damage the creatures did was too great to be repaired. But a good enforcer is hard to come by, so the Imperial House is quick to spring for augments for their veterans. Lau would have functional legs again, but at the cost of learning to walk all over. Acclimating his nervous system to the electronics and sensors. He hated the process, he hated the legs, hated everything about his circumstances. What was worse, he wasn't at the precinct. Someone else was in charge while he was stuck adapting to the biotics. He had expected the precinct to be led by his deputy, Mills, while he was gone, but the escalating conflict with the heretical cell of mutants that he discovered was dragging out, and the higher-ups had seen fit to supplant Mills, instead transferring in the head of assistant precinct, Hollick, who had come with his own squad of subjugators that were leading the assaults on the mutant cultists. Lau knew Hollick only by reputation, but he would stop at nothing to see the precinct back in his hands, which meant every day spending hours training, hoping that his new legs would take. By the 3rd week cycle, he'd gotten himself walking. By 5, he was jogging. At 6, they cleared him to return to his home and said that in a few weeks he'd be back to work. He felt strange walking around his small hab without feeling the threadbare rugs under his feet. It was not the same sensation as wearing shoes or boots. The senses and the actuators could give his mind an approximate shape of the tilt of the angles of the bionics, but they didn't offer the rich detail of touch. It was like having his senses dulled to all but the narrowest of inputs. Still, it was enough that he could move around. Soon he'd be back in the office, reclaiming his position. He would have the opportunity to redeem himself, the opportunity to feel useful and functional again. He wouldn't have to deal with these doubts. A few days after returning home, he had a meeting with his direct supervisor. Hoping to be reinstated early, he was blindsided by what came next. "What do you mean I'm not getting the precinct back?" "It's only temporary, Captain Lau. Don't be melodramatic. But what you said is I can't have the precinct back from Hollick. What the hell is this about?" "I don't want to disrupt ongoing war action. You may not realize it, but under your nose, a substantial infestation of mutants occurred. They've been worming their way into multiple institutions. You can help with the prosecution of this war if you are ready to return to service, but you will follow Hollick's orders and recognize him as captain as long as he has the position. Understood?" "I cannot fathom what this interloper knows better than me about commanding my precinct." "He has been in charge of eradicating the beasts in a number of domes already. He is reliable, and his soldiers are special operations teams that report directly to him. They will see this mission to its end, so either submit to his authority or prepare to get busted down a rank and assigned to him anyway. Am I clear?" Lau had no leverage. He was out of power, and while he could rally those loyal to him, he didn't know whether any would be willing to stand up to this newcomer, and if they were, whether there would be enough there to usurp him. He was angry, but there was little to be done about it now. Better to bury the anger, let it drive him forward to the point where he could get his power back, and then deal with those who don't belong. Getting back in the office was step 1. He passed his physical, eventually. It took 3 tries. He passed his marksmanship test on the first. He even passed the temperament exam, which was the one he was actually worried about, considering how intensely he was feeling. The precinct felt like home as he walked through it, walking past the bullpen and the desks of officers that he'd known for decades. His office, of course, was occupied by the interloper Hollick, but they'd cleared another they had been using for storage out to make room for their captain in waiting. He didn't approve of the choice. It felt like a snub very directly. But, of course, he wasn't in charge, so in the end, it wasn't up to him. Being back in the office, he was able to start piecing together what had happened in his absence. It appeared that there had been multiple successful raids on suspected mutants, but as he looked at the after-action reports and the evidence, he noticed there was unusual inconsistencies. Helmet cam footage was missing in most of the raids. The bodies of mutants made up a significantly smaller percentage of those killed than the nests that he'd discovered. Perhaps they were rushing their paperwork. Maybe they were destroying bodies and not reporting it. Something was off. Because of the sensitive nature of these reports, they would very quickly be wrapped up and classified, unlikely to ever be reopened, so he had to work quickly. In between shifts, Lau started trailing and monitoring the communications of the strike team. He was suspicious they were up to something, so he wanted live data on their operations. He observed them shaking down locals looking for suspicious hideouts. He saw them kicking in doors and searching buildings. But for several weeks of spending every moment not on patrol going after them, he had yet to see a successful raid that located mutants. That changed one night. He was at a noodle bar in Vox intercept range, enjoying the slimy noodles made from algae and a rich broth with chunks of probably best not to think about what the meat was. It was hot and filling, and it gave him something to do while he listened. He knew that they were out on deployment. He heard one call for the special weapons wagon and quickly made his way to the building that they were entering. A dilapidated place, it was easy enough to get inside. Staying low and keeping back, he prepared to listen and observe the operation. To his surprise, the moment they entered, the strike team shut down comms. It wasn't long before shots were fired, and the booming sounds of concussion rams and stun grenades filled the building, followed by shotgun blasts. Lau slipped back out of the building, not wanting to get closer without risking being caught up in the raid itself, and as he did so, he saw two members of the strike force unloading body bags from the back of the special weapons team Taurox. These were body bags that they brought with them? He was confused. This didn't make any sense. He thought again about the moments before. Why? Why were they using suppression weapons and then lethal force? What was going on with this special operations team? There was no reasonable explanation. He was at a crossroads. He could turn around and report these inconsistencies to the higher-ups, who would almost certainly not enjoy his grievances yet again causing issues, or he could start a confrontation. Lau wasn't one to charge headlong into a suicide mission, but he did have the advantage of surprise and the official capacity on his side. He removed his helmet, rounded the corner, and yelled out to the two. "Officers, do you need assistance? I'm Captain Lau. We met briefly." But before he could finish his sentence, a gun was drawn and fired in his direction. He dove, tossing a grenade under the vehicle that they were next to, and sending the two subjugators scrambling. The explosion badly damaged the Taurox and knocked them off their feet, with Lau taking the opportunity to stand and draw his weapon, advancing and firing. He missed one but connected in the leg with the other, an area not as heavily armored. To his surprise, both stood up, one drawing a pistol and the one who'd drawn first, having lost his in the explosion, drew a stun baton and charged. Lau continued to fire his stubber, hitting mostly armor, but a lucky shot moments before his opponent closed with him caught the man in the neck, dropping him to the ground. He advanced to the flaming wreck of the Taurox, using it for cover, and chambered an armor-piercing round in his stub pistol. Moments later, the enforcer he shot in the leg rounded on him, but Lau reacted quickly, putting a hole right through the eye lens of the man's helmet. The blood spatter was intense, and as it hit the armored plates of Lau's uniform, there was a hissing sound as the substance corroded everything it touched. "What the hell was that?" he said aloud to no one, perhaps to his helmet cam. He brought his focus back to the moment. The explosion had been loud and was now over a minute ago. The rest of the team was surely on their way down. 4 enforcers armed with special weapons. One captain who wasn't planning to start a fight. It almost didn't feel fair. He grabbed the downed enforcer's lost stubber and checked the body bag. It was one of the deceased mutants, like they had all been found in the previous raids, but it wasn't dead by any obvious cause. Suddenly the strange report started to make sense. Hollick wasn't discovering new pockets of infection. He was creating them artificially, raiding hideouts, planting bodies, making it seem like the problem was worse, undermining confidence in the existing captain, seizing power. And clearly his men knew to keep the secret on this project, being willing to kill one of their own in cold blood just for stumbling upon the scene. Still, something didn't sit right. He didn't have any longer to puzzle out the problem, though, as he was suddenly under fire again, a heavy bolter punching holes and rocking the ruins of the Taurox that Lau was using for cover. They didn't seem to know where he was, and in all likelihood the burning wreck's heat signature was masking his location. He had the opportunity to run. He seized it without hesitation, fleeing and keeping the vehicle and its overpowering heat between him and the thermal scanners. There was an alley a block down. He turned and slipped down it, but as he did so, he looked back and saw that they were in pursuit. They'd made it past the wreck and they'd caught his signature. He wasn't going to get away so easily. He had to come up with something. Being killed or captured really didn't appeal to him, but there was no one left to call for help. Unless... He realizing that he was going to corner himself, he began banging on every back door and boarded up hovel along the alley, shouting insults, yelling raid, yelling anything he could think of to get their attention. This part of town was all unauthorized for habitation. The thought that they were being raided or that rivals were present would make them defensive. They might buy him time. He ran further down the alley into the darkness, soon coming to a dead end. Turning back to take up a defensive position for his last stand, he looked down the alley and saw several dozen warm bodies between him and the subjugators.
"Return to your domiciles. Pursuit in progress,"
the sergeant's vox barked, but only a handful of the figures retreated.
"This is our neighborhood. You don't belong here. We don't want forces down here, you hear me? We don't want to have to do something drastic, but we will."
The confrontation was going to escalate, starting with swear words and slurs exchanged, for one of the hivers, clearly out of his mind to even own such a thing, tossed a plasma grenade out the window of their hovel. It exploded in midair before anyone had time to react, sending everyone in the street sprawling to the ground. The blast had consumed 2 of the remaining subjugators, and the other 2 turned on the hovels and opened up hell, firing the heavy bolter into the habs without the thought of who the shots would be hitting. The other opened up with a shotgun, plugging round after round into the mob, but quickly took an auto pistol blast in the hip in an unarmored spot from a scummer who was playing dead. He went down, losing consciousness quickly from the blood loss. Lau advanced, dispatching the heavy bolter as he struggled to load another box of ammunition after unloading the heavy weapon so carelessly. 4 shots in the head, at least one penetrating the helmet, bouncing around inside and turning what once was a head into hot bloody soup. Not wanting to risk further confrontation with the scummers, he sprinted out of the alley. It was going to be a hell of a report explaining all this. Still, something about it bothered him. There was something he was missing. Before he could leave, he wanted to take one more look. He returned to the body of the first subjugator he killed. Pulling off the helmet, he was shocked. Like the other man's blood, this one's burned and damaged his gloves as it came into contact. Underneath, the man's head bore the same strange forehead ridges he'd seen on the other mutants. It finally clicked. These teams, they weren't just faking the raids. They were using them as cover. They would offer up a few token of their kind to keep the Imperial House off their scent. But if that was the case, Hollick, he must know, right? Surely he'd seen his own officers without their helmets. Though, they could have used a falsehood. He'd need to look into Hollick more once he got the footage of the encounter to the higher-ups. But no one could be trusted at this point. They'd been right about one thing. The infestation went much higher than anyone realized.